Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this feature edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. This is our special Hunt Fish 250 celebration as we are celebrating our nation's birth, 250 years, and we are looking at conservation, the role of sportsmen and women, how we have come from our founding and pre-founding to where we are today in 2026, celebrating all that sportsmen and women have done for this great nation for the betterment of everybody. With that, we have come from the start, our history, looking at policy. We were brought forward to current day with our senior director, Taylor Smits, and our CEO, Jeff Crane, talking about CSF's role in that, our caucuses, policy that has brought us to the fore. So now I want to kind of take all of that and apply it to a great case study in the wild turkey. And later on in the show, we'll be joined by Fisheries Senior Director Chris Horton. We're going to look at fisheries as well, because while we have focused largely on hunting aspect of our history as we're celebrating, there is a huge side of the house with fisheries that so many of us like to go out and get a line wet. So we're going to talk to Chris about that later in the show. But as we're coming out of, as we're recording this, many of the turkey seasons are closing. And when the show does drop, we'll be a few weeks removed or a couple of weeks removed from the last bell, at least in Maine. So at any rate, I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on the show and good friend of CSF, and probably one of the most knowledgeable living encyclopedias of the wild turkey. And that is Rob Keck. Rob, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for carving out the time and sharing, what I imagine is going to be some pretty awesome sound bites with us and your knowledge, a life dedicated to the wild turkey.
Fred, thanks so much. It's an honor for me to be part of anything that CSF does. Having served 2 terms on the board of directors, I'm passionate about what the policy part of conservation is all about. We've got so many challenges out there, as we all know, and the things that happen in our state capitals as well on Capitol Hill there in DC are going to impact all those conservation efforts. And just an honor to be here. Thanks for asking me to be part of this as we celebrate our nation's 250th anniversary. We've got so much to celebrate today in wildlife. We live in the golden years of wildlife, something that 100 years ago people never thought would occur.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And those past conversations on the show have brought us right to that point. Our founding the folks come over, they settle, there's flora and fauna about, and then they have to go through the ups and downs of understanding what real conservation is. Species are just about extrapolated from the landscape. They understand market hunting is a bad thing. And they start putting together ideas and how to formulate and how to recover species. The wild turkey went through that same iteration, almost extrapolated from the entirety of the lower 48. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the most dense populations that was left was in about the 1920s in the South Carolina Low Country area. And from there, the species was brought about again over, I'd say the next 90 to 100 years. If we're looking at 2020 and early on in the early to mid 60s, and then fast forward a bit to the founding of the National Wild Turkey Federation. You leaders like you and the early on leaders got your minds together and started trying to figure out how to do this with state agencies, with local policymakers, and then bringing that out. what got us to the point? What kind of policy, Rob, did you have to engage in or work with the state agencies to get to a point where you could start putting wild turkeys in cardboard boxes or other means perhaps, and moving them about the countryside and getting them to establish themselves in 49 out of 50 states?
Brett, let me just back up a little bit.
Sure.
Back in the 20s, 30s, right after the turn of that last century, the wild turkey was certainly on the brink of extinction. And it was in places like coastal South Carolina. It was deep in southern Alabama and Mississippi. And there were a few remnant flocks that were up in the mountains of Pennsylvania. And those served as reservoirs in which turkeys were to be moved. But there was a lot of trial and error. In fact, I look at Pennsylvania. For many years, millions of dollars were being spent on pen-reared turkeys and releasing them. It was also done in Tennessee and a number of other states. And so it was only in the 50s, after the trap and transfer of wild turkeys really became an eye opener for wildlife managers, because up until that time, we didn't know what it was going to take to reestablish those flocks. And it took a lot of effort to close down those game farms and to really focus that trap and transfer was the way to go. So we had to overcome some of the challenges in state government to close those game farms down. It got pretty ugly there for a while.
Mm.
But when we saw the immediate success of trapping and transferring those birds into this unoccupied habitat that had been without turkeys for over 100 years, laws became established where protection of those birds, once they got on the ground, began to expand and eventually into seasons and bag limits. There were so many challenges back during that time in the 60s, 70s. When I came on board at the Federation in 1978, there were only 30 states that even had a turkey season. But what it took was a partnership. We put together the best minds that there were in the turkey world to say, okay, what's the best habitat? And the turkey's been really proving us we didn't know as much as we thought we did through the years. I mean, back in the 70s, the conventional thinking was that you needed 10,000 acres of mixed pine hardwood forests to establish turkeys. Well, it was only after we began releasing them in some of the upper Mississippi River valleys, when we looked at Iowa, Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, northern Illinois, we began to see that openings were really important. But it took legislation to try to and policy to try to establish these reservoirs and the protection that was needed to get them established. We had some real big challenges that were out there, that as fast as we were releasing turkeys on public lands, poaching was just running rampant. And the establishment then of the TIPS program and these different reward programs that had to be established by the agencies to try to curb this problem that we encountered. And we still encounter some of that today, but we saw it in North Georgia, we saw it in Southern Ohio, we saw it Eastern Texas, that as fast as we were letting turkeys out of the box, man, they were getting killed off. And so there was a real mindset that had to be established as well. And to show that there was a value, a replacement value for those birds if they were taken, by poachers and illegal efforts. And then it took some real work on policy on setting seasons and bag limits. And it's been one that has been a lot of trial and error, because this turkey just continues to go beyond what we were considering as being ancestral range. We've seen them go up into the boreal forests, and all of that had impacts and on policy that had to be established on how we're going to manage and what we're going to do to try to restore and to educate. And there were some places, some states that required a turkey hunter education course
Mhm.
so that people, would understand what it's going to take to go out and hunt them, to pursue them, to have them for the future. And, it was just amazing that for well over a century, there was nobody that was there to pass along the history, the heritage of hunting the wild turkey. There were only a few remnant places where that took place, but it happened with partnerships on both the state and the federal level. And, many times NWTF and, myself have been given credit for that restoration. Well, let me tell you something. There was no one person, there was no one organization, there was no one agency that made it all happen, because we also then had to help out some neighboring states that didn't have a reservoir of turkeys. It took uh, moving them from one state to another. And we had to deal with things like the Lacey Act. We had to deal with all kinds of different rules, procedures, uh, what have you, to make sure that we were legally moving turkeys from one area to another area of unoccupied habitat.
Mm.
And there were a lot of moving parts to all this, but the results were quick, they were amazing, and it engaged people from all walks of life. Even those that didn't hunt were seeing turkeys on the landscape where they'd never seen before. It was just a great partnership effort.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it wasn't one agency, one organization, but it's that people power, and specifically the sportsmen and women that come together to motivate and start putting coalitions together that precipitate an organization being stood up to focus solely on something like that in an NWTF. Okay, now we have a membership-based organization. We're strategizing, we're putting all the great minds together. Now we start these partnerships with state agencies. We start working through those state agencies with the local legislators and the state capitals, and that again precipitates bigger legislation at the federal level. Without that base, that grassroots movement of our sportsmen and women,
They
is
brought
there a
us,
reason? Is there a reason to bring
they
back?
brought us to the golden age of wildlife. We, I never forget what Gary Player said. I was hosting a show for Bass Pro Shops called Outdoor World. It was on Sirius XM, and I had a chance to visit with Gary Player, the Hall of Fame South African golfer. And he said, the people of this country are absolutely spoiled. He said, I've played golf courses all around the world. And he said, there's no place like the United States. And he said, you people, when you wake up every morning, should kiss the ground that you walk on for what we have here.
Mm.
And so many people take it for granted that the wildlife that we have today has always been here. There have been, a lot of people that have taken advantage of the great work, the partnership work in bringing back not only wild turkeys, but white-tailed deer, black bear, pronghorn, you know, even looking at our nation's symbol, sportsmen have paved the way. And, there's so many that have lost sight, understanding, or knowledge of that history. And we have been spoiled in many ways. And if we're going to pass this great heritage on to the next generations and beyond, we're going to have to continue to bring that history up so that people understand we've got to continue with these partnerships on all different levels, whether it's on the ground or whether it's in the policy arena. And as we become, as hunters, a smaller percentage of the overall nation's population, we're becoming less and less politically relevant. And we have got to make sure that the good science that's been done by the agencies and organizations like the NWTF, that it doesn't get lost, that it doesn't get lost in the politics of wildlife management. And unfortunately, we're seeing it so often, more and more every day, that the politics of wildlife management is trumping, no pun intended, the good science of wildlife management. And so we have got to make sure that decisions that are made at the state level, especially, are done for the right reasons, have the scientific backing instead of the politics that has driven so many of the issues that we have today. People love to have wildlife, but they really don't know how to live with it. And as you look at urban sprawl across this country, look at places like South Carolina, which had just one of the fastest rates of growth in the past year, and you see how that building developments are moving into the habitat that was occupied by deer and turkeys and all kinds of other critters. When they come in and they eat their shrubbery, when they cause lots of different vehicle collisions and what have you, they don't know exactly how to handle it. And so we're going to have to deal with this in a real positive way, in a way that we can continue to manage wildlife in the way that it needs to be managed, the way that our professionals, our wildlife professionals, have really launched the map, the roadmap on what it's going to take to have wildlife in the future.
Robin, you were talking about the state level issues and our community becoming less, the hunter specifically, part of the population, and that education, that history. I can't help but think, as we're recording this, late last week, the news broke. As obviously we've been following this for quite a while now, but the Oregon IP 28 appears to have gotten its signature, and it hit all the mass media markets and all the major news three-letter channels that are out there. I saw it over the weekend. And now this idea that hunting and fishing and just basic cattle raising and the Orkin man could all become illegal overnight if these signatures are certified and this gets to the ballot in November and Oregon votes this stuff down. Um, it is so important that, to your point, we're telling this and we're maintaining these partnerships and giving those agency folks and the people that we work with a voice to counter this crazy. This is craziness. I don't know how else to put it. It's
It
mad
is. No
insanity.
question about it.
And if it gets even to the ballot, I think that's just I can't put words on it because if it can happen there, we all know Oregon, for what it is, not the entire state, but there's a population density there that can runs the whole state. My point is if it happened there, it can come over to the east, it can happen in the south. Just anywhere people are crazy enough to get this stuff out there and they just need some sympathetic hearts or minds to give them an opportunity. That's all they need. Um
Ballot box biology is ruining the
yeah.
future of wildlife management.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, thank God only about half the country has that ability. The rest, we still got to go through the legislature, which is a challenge, but there are not a simple majorities to get to on some of this stuff. I bring this up because, people look at turkeys today. I don't want to fast forward too fast because there's so much I want to talk about history wise, but there was such a good job with the recovery, and the wild turkey just seems to establish itself wherever it possibly can. They're just great hardy birds, mostly. That you have the urban sprawl, like you mentioned, and people see them and don't know any different. They didn't grow up in a time when we didn't have wild turkeys. They just see them as common as a gray squirrel running around their yard, and they think they can become a nuisance, and they have their backyard biologist certification and think they have solutions for this, and they start to vilify specifically the turkey. And this brings an example like in Maine a few years ago, where they really liberalized the bag limits on such an important resource, publicly held resource. And a few individuals with motivations pushed and pushed hard, and they got it. And you can kill 5 turkeys in the fall, you can kill 2 in the spring. And we recently thwarted an effort to uh, liken turkey bag limits to the same as a rough grouse. Now they weren't season specific. I think they just wanted 4 birds a day during the entire season, fall and spring, which, as you well know, Rob, would have just completely wiped out all the generations of work that have gone into establishing that bird here in the Northeast.
I think that one of the issues that we as sportsmen and women face is that we don't sell ourselves or our product very well. We've got so many wildlife success stories out there, but unfortunately, the general public doesn't know that we are the heroes of conservation. You look back at the bald eagle when it was delisted, 20 years ago, it was front page news. And in that story, and this came out of the Fish and Wildlife Service, it listed hunters and DDT as the cause of the demise of the bald eagle in this country, our
Mhm.
nation symbol. Well, that was not the case. That was not it at all. But there was no mention about hunters' dollars bringing the bald eagle back to numbers which hadn't been seen in many times. I mean, people all over the country now are seeing bald eagles everywhere. And we're the people, we the hunters that have paid the license fees, the stamps, and all the other dollars that we've generated have helped pay for the research and the management to bring back our nation's symbol. But you know what? The general public doesn't know that. And when you look at all the other wildlife species that we've been part of, we have been a terrible, terrible group of salespeople out there. We have got to highlight the great opportunities that we've provided. We've purchased lands that are open to the public. We've taken and provided opportunities for people from all walks of life to see wildlife like never before. I've oftentimes said that what we as hunters have done is improve the quality of life for all Americans.
Mhm.
Never forget, up in New York, I was there at a seminar, and afterwards there was a little old lady come up to me, just as sweet as could be, and she said, "I just want to thank you for bringing back the wild turkey." And I said, "Well, I can't take credit. There were a lot of people involved." She said, "I live," and she was probably up in her late 80s, and she said, "I live in the farmhouse that I was born in." And she said, "When I was a kid, we didn't have wild turkeys." But she said, "Today, when I go out to the mailbox in April or May, and I get the mail out and I slam the mailbox door shut, there's an old gobbler that gobbles to me up there on the ridge." And she said, "It makes my day."
Mhm.
And it really illustrated the point that we can improve and have improved the quality of life of so many. Who doesn't enjoy seeing a flock of geese overhead as they migrate south or north, whether it's in the spring or the fall, or the bugle of an elk that we now can hear in the east, not just in the west, or the gobble of the wild turkey in the spring? It's been an amazing thing on what hunters have done. And we have got to tell this story, Fred, better than ever, because it will have an impact on policy. It will have an impact on those legislators out there that can hear and understand that hunting is good, hunting is conservation. And this country was founded on it, and we need it for the future.
Yeah, no doubt, and it is a uniquely American experience. You mentioned the gentleman you were golfing with earlier. You know, parts of the continent in Africa have countries have it figured out somewhat, but not the way we do it. And it's just very apropos for the celebration of 250, um, the uniqueness of our model of the American system of conservation funding, of how all sorts of stakeholders got together almost 90 years ago and said, "Hey, we got a way to put this on our backs voluntarily. We'll impose a manufacturer level sales tax on firearms and ammunition," and see that evolve through the years to archery tackle and then fishing as well. And like you said, we do all the work. It's all on us for the benefit of everybody. And we're not going to be conceited about it. But to your point, we do need to plant our flag better and tell our story better so that people do have an appreciation. So when something crazy like an IP-28 comes up, or some other states trying to wipe out all the turkeys because they think they're eating all their blueberry bushes, um, the general population, one, says, "Oh, that sounds kind of out of whack," and then two, they can look to the state agency as well, because we saw that work out in Colorado in the last election cycle when they tried to outlaw cat hunting, and the population looked to the people, more ballot box biology, by the way. They looked to the state agency, and the state agency said, "This is not the way to go. This is not sound science, wildlife management," and the people voted it down, which was great. Now we got to continue to tell that story, like exactly like you said, Rob.
Yeah. Well, when you think back in Theodore Roosevelt's time, back in that day when market hunting was just, I mean, it was commonplace. People lived off the land. They thought there was a never-ending supply of protein that the land would provide. But as we saw those populations of wildlife dwindle and go away, his ability to gather like-minded people was a challenge. I heard one friend from South Africa mention, it's hard to talk conservation to someone with an empty belly. Now you can imagine what Roosevelt had to do to a hungry nation, wildlife feeding a hungry nation, a growing nation. To talk conservation was foreign to them. And the struggles that we've had to go through in this country from Roosevelt then on into, to Leopold, to so many others that have forged the way to understand that if we're going to have wildlife, we have got to have seasons and bag limits. There's got to be laws that are going to restrict or help manage these wildlife populations. So, as we look to the future, we're going to have more and more of the Roosevelts in this country to talk up, to gather like minded people together. Not that we've got hungry bellies to feed today like we did back, over 100 years ago. But if we want this to perpetuate itself, it's going to take hunters and people that understand what hunting means to wildlife populations, to the enjoyment and bringing the quality of life to everybody. We've got a huge job ahead of us, and we've got a story that's got to be told. And unfortunately, we talk to ourselves way too much. We don't get into mainstream media. We have got to tell this story in a way that we've never done it before, Fred. And these are the kinds of things that will impact our policy makers. They've got to understand that. And we've got to do everything we can to support that. I think about judges that adjudicate, let's say, wildlife criminals, those that violate the law. They've got to understand what the replacement costs are in replacing an elk that was illegally taken, and that fines and imprisonment or confiscation of related equipment are all very, very important to try to curb any lawlessness that takes place. And it's hard to believe that we've got wildlife criminals out there, but every day we read about them, we hear about them. And so we've got to make sure that we clean up our act and that we educate not just the policymakers, but the judges as well to help carry out those laws that the policymakers make. So this is going to be a tremendous job as we become that smaller percentage of the overall population of the United States of America.
When you talk about that policy making as it concerns poaching and restitution, there is a nice trend we've been seeing over the last few sessions. We just here in New Hampshire, where I live, we got some legislation updated where the penalties were in some cases less than a parking ticket, which was just so insulting. But you're starting to see the appreciation, the value for this publicly held resources, and we're seeing states start to bring those up substantially and like really make it hurt. I would like to make it hurt tremendously and let me put the price tag on it. We'll stop it overnight, I think. But yeah, it's nice to see that come about, right? Part of that advocacy.
Totally. That we have got to do just exactly what you said.
Yeah. Um, Before we get out of here, because we're coming up to 30 minutes on this, and I want to be respectful of your time. Can you
Sure.
tell us a story or a time? So, in the early days of the restoration project, is there an instance that jumps to the fore that there was a challenge? Like, hey, we want to get these turkeys from A to B, or we want to work in this state to see if we can establish a population. Did you ever experience any pushback from the agencies? Did people look at you and scratch their head like, why the hell would we want these birds in this state? Did any of that ever occur?
Well, I can think of several different occurrences, but
Yeah.
let me give you one that was firsthand in the state that I grew up in Pennsylvania. And they've got a great program. They've got wonderful leadership, and they've done a tremendous job with the wild turkey. But back during the 70s, it was one that there were parts of the state that were getting pen-reared turkeys. They were being released down in the Southwest, down in Green Allegheny County, and up in the Northeast, up in Susquehanna County. And the habitat was considered marginal or submarginal. Well, we come to find out that that was not really the case. And the politics that were there to continue to release those birds in both those parts of the state were very, very strong. They impacted the decisions that the biologists were making back then. And first of all, we had a tremendously difficult time to close down that game farm because there was a lot of politics involved with it. But when I got with the biologist, I told him about some of the other habitats where eastern turkeys were. I said, we need to be putting wild trap birds into those areas to get them established. One of them was in my backyard, and it was the lower Susquehanna River Valley. They also were releasing some pen-reared birds down there. Well, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, and I know I'm going to show my age by referring to that time frame, it was, ringneck pheasants ruled. We had great pheasant hunting at that time. I'm talking about wild pheasants, no turkeys. And as time went along, I got with the biologist and I told him, I said, we need to be releasing turkeys down in that lower Susquehanna River Valley. The biologist said, Rob, it'll never work. We need 10,000 acres of contiguous mixed pine hardwood forests. I said, it will work. I said, I've been to the upper Mississippi. I look at places like eastern Iowa. Less than 4% of that land has timber, and they've got the highest density of eastern turkeys anywhere. Mm. I said, we need to put them there. He said, Rob, it'll never work. I said, it will. I said, there's high fertility, lots of agriculture. There's riparian areas. He said, Rob, we got to have 10,000 acres. Well, of mixed pine hardwood forests. And it took him retiring, getting a new biologist and a new executive director that listened to what I said. I said, I've been to these parts of the upper Mississippi where eastern turkeys are doing extremely well. I said, it's just like that in the southern part of the state, south central part along the Susquehanna. And they said, well, let's try it. Well, we tried it. And we overcame the thinking that it wouldn't work to the point where once those birds were released in protected areas like the Muddy Run area and others, those birds got to start on both sides, Lancaster and York County of Pennsylvania, to where the flocks grew to hundreds and some great turkey densities overall. And it took a lot of tenacity. It took a change of thinking to finally break through and get a population established. And it was one that it just was so satisfying to me. I remember when that season opened then in that part of the state, I wanted to go back. I wanted to sample it. And it was there along the where the Conestoga River or Creek comes into the Susquehanna River at a place called Safe Harbor. There was public land, Pennsylvania Power and Light land. I was able to call in and kill a turkey where I could look down across the river and see the ball diamond where I played Little League baseball as a kid. And there were no turkeys there. And it was one of those that, it really took some effort to change the thinking and to get the mindset correct that turkeys are very adaptable. And that was a hard thing. Even today, when I think about many parts of the northern reaches, you look in New England, you look at the original range maps, and it showed the wild turkey was just in the southeastern part of Maine. Well, as we well know, as you talked about, those birds just exploded throughout to the New Brunswick border. Mm-hmm. I was in New Brunswick last spring, and I was with an outfitter there that guides bear hunters, outfits for bear hunters. He said, Rob, we've got turkeys now to the far northern reaches of New Brunswick. He said, in the boreal forest. And I can tell you 30 years ago, conventional thinking said it'll never happen. It'll never take place. And I think that we have got to always be open-minded to just maybe the thinking that wildlife's going to teach us instead of just what conventional thinking has done. So there's many different places where it's worked out. I look over in British Columbia. Uh, I remember we wanted to give birds to the province. They said they were non-native. They won't work up here. We released them on the Washington State BC line. Well, guess what happened? The turkeys have moved into British Columbia and they've expanded way up.
Mm.
And so there were so many examples of opposition to releasing birds, opposition to thinking that they had ever become established. And I think that we have always got to be patient and persistent and look forward to just where opportunities lie. Expand our horizons. Don't be closed minded on just what can occur out there for the benefit of wildlife and the benefit of the general public. So it's been just an honor for me to be part of so many of those releases, so many of the many partnership meetings that we had, symposia that we've conducted to share thoughts on what it's going to take to have the wild turkey all across this great land. And of course, that's happened again with so many wildlife species. And we do live in the golden age of wildlife.
I would agree with that. You said persistent, and I key in on that. And, I think that's an important word to think about and consider when you're talking about this history going forward and trying new ideas. But that word is also quite applicable to policy making that, we may not get a bill passed or an initiative passed in one session, two sessions, hell, even three or four. But we're persistent and we keep working, we keep advocating and educating policymakers and working together with partners to tell these stories. And eventually we get there. It could be a long haul, but once we get there, it's satisfying and you're living proof of all of that. And I
You
just
know,
appreciate you
Brett,
saying that.
I want to throw in one other thing too before we leave. Growing up in Pennsylvania, I was certainly impacted by having great mentors, my parents, my grandparents, my uncles, what have you. But I had to wait till I was 12 years old before I could get a hunting license. But I had that passion at a much earlier age than that. Only when I moved to South Carolina, where there was no age restriction at all, and I saw kids that were 5, 6, 7 years old with their first turkey, their first duck, their first deer. And I'm thinking, man, I got cheated out
Mm.
of some opportunity. I said, I want to change some things. And I know that I got with National Shooting Sports Foundation and CSF, and we said, look, let's change this. I said, across the country, there's opportunities. If we're going to have hunters in the future, we've got to start them earlier. The state of New York at that time, you had to be 16 years old before you could hunt a white-tailed deer with a firearm. Well, you talk about a low return on recruitment.
Right.
We had to break down those barriers. And so I led the way with the help of several others in breaking down those barriers. I took Pennsylvania, for example. I said, we're going to lower that minimum hunting age. And so I got with the director of the state agency, got with the commissioners, the hunter ed people, got with the Pennsylvania Outdoor Writers Association, and we got it passed 202 to 1 in the House, unanimous in the Senate. I introduced Governor Rendell at the bill signing ceremony where we took that minimum age from 12 to 0, that there wasn't going to be a requirement of age, but let parents make the decision,
Mm.
not the government make the decision when a kid's ready to hunt. And so you talk about making a difference for the future of our great outdoors, the future of conservation and recruiting young hunters, young conservationists. And of course, we did that across the country. I think 2.5, 3 million people since that time have been able to come in through mentored programs. And to me, that was just another element as we look, a very important element to the future of hunting is being able to recruit young hunters at an early age.
And to that point, breaking down barriers, I mean, you just look at last session, Pennsylvania again, with the governor's Sportsman's Caucus co-chair and Governor Shapiro signing that bill with Representative Steele, rescinding the long-standing prohibition on Sunday hunting. You talk about that key demographic. Well, if they're in sports on Saturday, all these little kids are out there in all the travel sports now. Nothing's ever local anymore. But they all they have is Sunday, and then they didn't, and now they have it. So you just
Bet.
doubled the weekends for all Pennsylvanians, and that's fantastic. A couple other things I wanted to hit on before we check out of here, and that is uh, policy evolves. You've this has been a theme through your storytelling throughout this program, and it continues to evolve. So specifically around the wild turkey, I was laughing when you're talking about some of your efforts. I got to thinking about wildlife biologist, God rest his soul, Ted Walsky, up here in New Hampshire. And Ted was the turkey, I think it was upland bird biologist, but turkey biologist for 4 decades for New Hampshire
Bet
fishing
I
game.
knew Ted.
Yeah. And when I made the push, I might have been working with NWTF at the time, but when TSS came about and federal had put out a very comprehensive package of the science and the ballistics and all the information, I presented that at a fishing game meeting and said, "Hey, now's the time to consider bringing in 410s." And you would have thought I just said the most blasphemous thing. When I walked out of that meeting, Ted was so quiet. He yelled at me from across the parking lot, "Come over here." And he's got his lacrosse, muck boots on still and his green pants tucked in him. I loved it. And he said, "I don't know why you're messing around with this 410 stuff. Them 410s are nothing but for women and for little kids." I said, "Ted, the times have changed. The technology has changed. This is access. This is opportunity." And, yeah, we had a good back and forth on it. And eventually we got that passed, but he just thought that was the craziest thing to get 410s out there after turkeys. And I appreciated where he was coming from, it was just
Well, I
pretty
love
fun.
a 410. I've been doing it for the last 7 years. And I tell you what, it's just amazing what TSS has done to
Mhm.
just change the whole complexion of shooting a wild turkey and waterfowl, both.
Yep, and we are having to update that policy and update those regulations. And another controversial topic, we won't have to get into it here, but fanning and reaping. This was, the internet really blew it up. It's a long-standing practice people have used. You either do or you don't, but now there's policy being made around it. Is it safe? Is it not safe? How do you do it? Where can you do it? Some people are just shutting it down altogether. So, as things happen, as things evolve, techniques, technology, there's always going to be something else to address. And it's going back to what you said, that educating and advocating and working with partnerships gets a lot of this done, and so far in a pretty positive way, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at it, just not with fans and reaping, but states like Alabama, the first 2 weeks of the season, you can't use decoys.
Mhm.
And for many, many years, you couldn't use decoys, period. And I remember when they finally changed that you could use it. Boy, I'll tell you, in some parts, it was just, it was hard to imagine that you'd have such a fight. But, you look at trail cameras. I mean, there's some states now that have outlawed the use of trail cameras in trying to locate game, and so there's a lot of different things as modern technology advances that we're going to have to deal with policy wise. And it comes down then to is it ethical? Is it the kind of way that we should pursue wildlife? Uh, fair chase is certainly always in the forefront of our minds. And you can make some strong arguments either way with some of these issues. And it's going to be a challenge for all of us so we can keep everybody pulling together because the last thing we need is division amongst the ranks of sportsmen and women.
Perfectly said, and I think that's where we end it right there. There's no more to be said, and I love that. Rob, thank you so much for your time. I always appreciate getting the chance to sit with you and hear and learn from you, and your storytelling abilities are just top notch. And I thank you for sharing your talents with us today. Thank you.
Oh, frankly, I love doing it. And as I've closed out, 20 years of television and 10 years on Sirius XM, I just want to thank you Fred, for answering the call, that call to conservation and preserving our rich hunting, fishing, and trapping heritage. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right, my thanks again one more time to Rob Keck for his time. And gosh, you guys know I'm a turkey nerd, and we definitely could have gone hours and made a multi-part series out of that conversation. And truly a man that's been at this for almost his entire life. Fun fact for some of you that don't know Rob and his history, uh, Rob actually went on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson many moons ago and ran turkey calls there on live TV, well, recorded TV, but nevertheless, he's played in some interesting circles for sure and continues to. But a real fascinating conversation, and we'll do it again some other time and get more Rob storytelling. But it was great to have him on. With that, and not running turkey calls on late night television, we turned down to Senior Fisheries Director Chris Horton, who's joining us. We did the species highlight with turkey, but also want to take a look at fisheries and see how recovery efforts for recreational species looks on the water or in the water. And Chris gonna tell us a little bit about that. Chris, welcome back.
Hey, Fred. Thanks. I guess. Thanks for sticking me right after Rob Keck, the most interesting man in the hunting community for sure, and somebody, like you, I've had the privilege of sitting around drinking coffee with Rob before meetings, and man, the wealth of knowledge and the experience and the stories that guy has is just it's unlimited. So I always enjoy talking to him. So, but yeah, man, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's always good to have you on and be able to unpack some history. So you and I talked offline about, there's obviously so much to cover in fisheries, but as far as recreational species go, and we look at recovery efforts, we talk a lot in the hunting community, but in fisheries, certainly there are programs we don't have angling, we don't have entry points for young people or even, late onset angling by way of hatchery systems and some put and take critters, fish. But then also, you had mentioned red drum down by you and what that recovery looked like. And I'm going to learn something here too because I did not know that this was a species that was recovered.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's the turkey and the whitetail recovery efforts are just. I mean, that's one of on the wildlife side. Those are huge. On the fisheries side, fortunately, we haven't seen certainly on the freshwater side, on the coastal side, inshore fishing. We haven't really seen major declines in most of those fisheries, just because we managed them well from the onset. But there are a couple instances where we did see a drastic decline in a fish population, and it was really anglers that started that whole recovery process, and that is the redfish or the red drum. It's redfish in the Gulf, red drum on the East Coast, but for our redfish fishery, Texas was kind of the epicenter for saltwater anglers kind of banding together for the first time, and really it started in the 1970s when Chef Paul Perdon started the black and redfish craze in New Orleans restaurants, and that grew. It was the hot item on restaurant menus, and of course, to be able to supply that demand, commercial fishing activity really ramped up in the 70s for redfish. And the challenge with redfish, or the challenge for management of redfish, especially in a commercial setting, is they aggregate in large schools offshore at times, and very large schools, and they were easy to get a net around. So they were easy to harvest, and we just saw a significant decline in the populations, and some Texas anglers, 14 of them, as a matter of fact, really started noticing that if they didn't do something, we were going to see this potential extirpation of red drum. The population declined so much. So these 14 anglers met at a tackle store in Houston, said, all right, we've got to start a campaign here, Save Our Redfish campaign in the late 70s. And out of that movement grew grew an association, the precursor to the CCA, essentially. I believe they're called the Gulf Coast Conservation Association. So they began lobbying in Austin to be able to do something about redfish conservation and reversing this tremendous decline that they saw going. In 1977, they were able to get a bill passed to begin down that path. And then in 1981, they got the state to basically say that redfish are a game fish and eliminated the gill nets that were also, they were catching them in purse seines and in gill nets. And, gill nets they really are the most indiscriminate type of commercial tackle out there, because they'll catch anything that swims into the net of a certain size. They can't just target, the species they're after. They're going to catch everything. So that stopped the commercial fishing aspect of it. But still, the population was struggling. Well, about this time, the technology in our hatchery systems had really gotten to a point where we could start producing red drum to stock in the wild. And that's exactly what CCA and Central Power and Light and Texas Parks and Wildlife opened a hatchery there in Corpus Christi, dedicated specifically to red drum and trout. And by 1983, they had their first stocking of red drum, and they got to the point where they were stocking around 15 million red drum a year. So they eliminated the commercial fishing and developed the hatchery technology in the hatchery to be able to start replenishing those fish. And today, that's why Texas is known as in the Gulf anyway, is the redfish state, because they from nearly the end, or the expert the elimination of red drum, are able to take and reverse that trend and restore that population. And along with that, aquaculture technology actually allowed for commercial production of red drum that are grown in ponds now. So if you go down to the coast, you can still get red drum on your menu. It's just it came from a commercial aquaculture and didn't come from the wild. So, but it was a really impressive recovery story. Louisiana was a little bit longer before they eliminated their. It's almost 14 years later. In 1995, they passed a state constitutional amendment that basically banned commercial fishing for red drum.
How did that effort help into tally, I guess, where we're at with the fish stock today? Because as you mentioned, I gave it away where I'm at on the East Coast. I call them a certain thing. And, those fish are, I think we've caught red drum on the south side of the Cape Cod. I think I heard one recently. I don't know how true that was. If it was a wayward fish or if they were actually migrating up, but they have the whole Gulf resupplied. And then, at least up to the mid-Atlantic. Did those efforts in Texas directly contribute to that, or was this multi-state efforts and working together to emulate what other states had done?
No, I don't. I think the effort in Texas and the aquaculture production that was started there in Texas actually benefited all the states that where redfish are common. So that there are opportunities for states to boost those populations at times, but yeah, redfish are becoming more popular, more prevalent all the way up the Atlantic coast, and they're becoming much more common in the Chesapeake Bay now. And part of that is just, I think, associated with just the shifts that we're seeing in climate at the moment, because we're seeing black sea bass stocks move north, we're seeing lobster populations move. Things are changing. Things are always dynamic and changing, but yeah, I think some of the ocean conditions have allowed redfish to expand, even further north. But yeah, I mean, hatchery technology, really in the 70s, 80s, 90s, really got really good at being able to produce fish and to supplement populations. And there's some cases where hatcheries are responsible for put and take fisheries largely to be able to encourage anglers to go fishing, whether it be a city lake or pond, or just supplementing populations whenever we see, dips in low year classes, maybe due to a habitat change. We can continue to supplement those populations until the conditions improve and natural natural reproduction takes over. So yeah, well, one note there, hatcheries aren't the silver bullet. They're one tool in the manager's toolbox. And typically most of the time, if we can keep the pressure off the fishery where it needs to be and allow the habitat to recover, the fish populations will take care of themselves, in the long run. But hatcheries have been a very instrumental tool, and pretty much any state fish hatchery is funded by anglers through their license fees as well as excess taxes.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great parallels there just with our conversation with Rob talking about wild turkey recovery specifically, and what that looked like early days, interstate collaboration, with trap and transfer, and what's working here could work here, and just all this cooperation, all these stakeholders coming together, and even more to that is the advances in technology, lessons learned. Talk about, if you could, the hatchery technology and what that means from the mid 70s and 80s to where we're at in 2026, as we think about 250 years of conservation. What was needed for that technology to advance to have more efficient and productive hatchery systems so that we can increase access and make these more enjoyable experience for all Americans who want to go get a line wet?
Yeah, I mean, again, the technology development was incredible. I know my first job out of graduate schools with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and even though I was a reservoir research biologist, I was on station there at the at one of our fish hatcheries here in the state, and actually started off as a technician before that job opened up for a few months. So I actually worked on the hatchery, but there was a time where we couldn't figure out necessarily how to spawn landlocked striped bass. So we know that striped bass in the Santee Cooper reservoir system, we discovered that they could live year round in fresh water. And so there was a lot of effort by some of the states to figure out, okay, can we spawn these things and produce them here rather than having to trade with those coastal states and get fry where they have them producing there. But the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission was one of the first states to kind of figure out how to do that. And the technique is you go out and you catch big spawners out of these reservoirs in the spring, which normally striped bass, they have to run far enough up a river so that when they spawn, because their eggs are demersal, which means they sink, they run far enough up a river to spawn so that those eggs tumble with the current. And by the time they reach the estuary, they're hatching. And then they find nursery cover there. So basically 48 hours from the time they're spawn is when they hatch. And we figured out a technique of inserting a capillary tube, which is a very small, tiny glass tube, into the ovary, and can extract the eggs and tell about how close they are to being ripe. They're not about pretty close to within the hour of when these eggs are going to be fertile. And then when they were ready to be spawned, you'd mix the milk from the male with the eggs from a female in a tub and gently stir them around. And you put them in these McDonald jars, which had been invented a few years before, to be able to simulate that current, that tumbling. So you've got a stream of fresh water flowing in the bottom that rolls up the side, so the eggs are constantly rolling. Man, you could ride on there. It was even after I left the hatchery, I would still help out on this because it's all hands on deck. Somebody had to be babysitting those fish and checking them every hour, all hours of the night. So you could ride spawned at 2:34 a.m. and in 48 hours later on that McDonald jar, you could come back and you'd start seeing fry coming out.
No kidding.
Similarly, I mean, we could test walleye, below dams, go harvest walleye electrofishing. Electrofishing doesn't kill the fish, it just stuns them. So you net them. And again, you can take that same capillary tube technique and grab some eggs and from that female, and she's green, which means she's not anywhere close to spawning. Just let her go and keep going through females till you find one that's ripe with eggs that are ready to spawn. And you have to do this under a microscope. But once they were ready to spawn, you mix the milk with the males, and we'd actually put them in trays in the river, because the river water was the best for those fish for hardening those eggs, and because they're really soft when they're first fertilized, and you'd let them sit there for an hour or so in those trays until they hardened up, and then they could be transferred to the hatchery. and then taken to the best hatchery with the right conditions, water temperature, and everything. Nowadays, that's even advanced further to where most hatcheries, if they're up to date on the technology, they have the way to manipulate water temperatures and water hardness and all the things we need to simulate the perfect spawning conditions for those fish. And it just has allowed for hatchery production to be so much higher, and so that we can be a lot more strategic on, okay, we're renovating this lake here, and we're going to need these fish in this order, so we can prioritize which fish we're going to grow, the states are going to grow based on that kind of that menu of, okay, we're going to restore this lake. Here's what we need first, second, third, and to be able to plan for that, and to have a hatchery that can accommodate all the conditions and that we need to be able to produce those fish at high numbers.
You mentioned the funding mechanism there, and people buying licenses and participating. By the time this show is published, we will have gone through a series of free fishing days or weekends, um, as we enjoy the opening of the seasons all around the country. Um, Talk about those dollars and how they specifically get to the hatcheries and what they do, because I think people just hear this blanket statement, my fishing license helps fund this. But I think if you drill down a little bit, and we can give specifics to an extent, I don't want to drill down too deep. Um, but I think it's important. So when people do go out there, in New Hampshire in April, and they're catching stocked rainbow trout, or they're, getting striped bass in Arkansas, um, makes it a little bit more personal, I think. If you could track a dollar and watch it go through the whole system from Fed match to the state agency, that would be interesting to follow that $1 and see what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most states, and Arkansas, we're a little bit different. Arkansas, Missouri, we're blessed with having what's called a conservation sales tax. So we have a 1/8% sales tax in the state. So anytime anybody buys anything with the state sales tax, 1/8 cents of that goes into a conservation fund. So we have some additional funds for conservation, both fish, wildlife. But in most cases, in most states, and that's still only a portion of the fisheries division actually gets that. But the bulk of the fisheries division funding, even in Arkansas, but certainly in other states that don't have that conservation sales tax, pretty much almost all of it is license sales, and it's the excise tax coming back in a federal aid grant. So basically, how that works is the state puts up 25% of the cost in that grant. They're eligible for reimbursement of 75% of that of the cost of the project. And I'll say cost of the project, that can be just regular fisheries management, where they're going out and sampling the lakes day to day. It can be hatchery operations, but the license sales help, the license fees make that 25% match, and then 75% of the cost comes from that excise tax. So basically, everything, whether you're seeing a fish truck dumping fish and you catch a stock fish, or you catch a wild fish that's being managed by the agency, maybe that there's a habitat restoration work done, and their fish are easier to catch because there's more fish because they have better habitat. Your license dollars funded all of that. And every time you purchased a rod, reel, fishing line, hooks, sinkers, that excise tax is set aside to come back to your state in order to help those efforts. So everything you do, whether you're buying tackle or buying licenses, you are supporting the fishing that you have around you.
When we think about consequential policy around fisheries, and again, look, this retrospective of looking back 250 years and maybe a little bit before, and then bringing us current, on this program, our audience surely is aware of Dingle Johnson, Wallop Bro. More recently, you specifically, and we've reported on in our other programming about, and forgive me, I forget the name of the act, but basically it closed the loophole for online overseas sales of fishing gear and tackle that would not contribute to Pittman Robinson. So you think of current policy, and if you want to give the name of that, you can. But once you do that, is there any other policy that has been so important to fisheries and angling and fishing habitat and restoration that the audience should know about as well?
Sure, and that bill you're talking about is the Sporting Goods Excise Tax Modernization Act, and that's to capture the excise tax that foreign or that American manufacturers or foreign importers that pay the tax. They're it basically is going to close the loophole for those foreign manufacturers that aren't currently paying the tax. So if say the Daiwas or the Shimano's, their products come in from Japan and to a distributor here in the U.S. or to Shimano's warehouses. I mean, once it goes to that first point of sale, they are paying the tax on it, even though many of their products are actually made overseas. But there are many fly-by-night manufacturers that are developing reels that are able to sell directly to someone on Amazon. That is not the first point of sale is you as a customer if you're buying one of those products, and technically you're supposed to pay the tax. But most anglers don't know that they even have to do that, and the cost of the IRS collecting those individual sales taxes would be way more expensive than the money we would be getting in return. So anyway, this bill just basically fixes that and requires those marketplace facilitators to be able to capture those taxes. Then, from a conservation funding standpoint, no, Dingle Johnson, Wallet Bro, and once we get the Sporting Goods Excise Tax Modernization Act passed, those are the most important bills out there. When it comes to fisheries in general, there's a number of other bills. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is the ACE Act was signed into law in 2018, which basically codified the National Fish Habitat Partnership program, which had been around literally in operation since 2007, which there's basically 20 fish habitat partnerships around the country. This is a grassroots sort of approach from a bottom up rather than a top down government agency. So these 20 partnerships that range anywhere from the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Ventures in your area, which is species based, although efforts to restore Eastern Brook trout to streams in the Appalachian region obviously benefits every other fish in those stretches. So you've got species specific groups. The Desert Fish Habitat Partnership is another one that focuses on desert fishes, some really cool fishes, obviously not sport fish, but inhabit some really unique areas. You've got the Western Native Trout Initiative, which is the whole, it covers all trout restoration efforts, salmon restoration efforts in the West. There's a number of partnerships. One is the Reservoir Fish Habitat Partnership, which I was one that was on that executive board when we first got it started, because reservoirs represent a lot of the fishing effort in this country. Matter of fact, 70%, the last estimate I saw was around 70% of the angling effort, freshwater angling effort in the United States is on lakes and reservoirs. So reservoirs are very important for fishing, for access for fishing. So there's a habitat partnership devoted to that because many of our reservoirs are really old. And once the reservoir is old and all the stuff that was flooded, all the trees and the shrubs that were flooded decades ago are all gone, and you can get to this kind of moonscape bottom. So you try to get aquatic vegetation established, or you spend a lot of effort trying to introduce new habitat. And again, trees are still great, but they're going to decompose over time too. So you need to continue to reinvest in that the habitat structure within the reservoirs. So, but anyway, that was finally codified back in 2018. Again, in the ACE Act, we recently in the last Congress, the end of the last Congress, reauthorized that program. So we have 20 fish habitat partnerships that basically touch every inch of the United States, and that program has been enormously successful because they only get a very small amount of funding. It's only like $7.2 million from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but those partnerships are able to leverage what little federal funds they get with state funds and with non-government funds, and usually the lowest I've seen is a 3-to-1, but I've seen as high as 10-to-1 match for every dollar. And again, these partnerships they're locally driven, so you have volunteers out there doing a lot of the work on the ground along with the states and the federal agencies, and it's just an incredibly successful program. From a fish habitat perspective, that's probably the most important legislation that's passed, and this is the 20th anniversary, along with the 250th anniversary of the United States. It's the 20th anniversary of the NFHAP, because it was officially started an MOU signed by the Secretary of Interior back in 2006.
One common thread with all of this is it is sportswomen driven. It is the people that are involved in it that are like you just gave the example of volunteering, using their dollars at a marketplace, using their dollars for licenses, simply donating. Um, and that is a completely different model than most of the way our markets are set up, where we start putting burdens on full populations, and our communities found ways to just keep it here and for the benefit of all. And that is celebrated all the way through this conversation, the conversations before in this series, and the ones yet to come as we as we celebrate Hunt Fish 250 and just look at these examples and celebrate the storytelling. And obviously with 250 here, we look to the future a little bit and then understand that none of us will be here for the next one. God willing, there is a next one for 250. But in the immediate future, Chris, as we wrap this up, what are things people should be looking at as, we think about this history and try to make it be cognizant of it and applying that, in the next couple decades. And, as we look towards access, as urban sprawl spreads out, maybe this is easier for angling more so than hunting, but, you still need access. You still need boat ramps. You still need places to shop and get gear. What should people be paying attention to as they're going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a concern with, we're becoming much more of an urbanized society, and fewer people that grew up like I did. There was the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and you just went hunting or fishing and spent all day in the woods. I think the concern is just having champions moving forward to advocate for not only fish and wildlife conservation, but the ability for the public to enjoy those our public resource, our fish and wildlife resources, in a way that allows us to really truly connect with them and through hunting and fishing. And we've always been, hunters and anglers have been the biggest advocates for conservation, and we don't want to see that. I think to be able to ensure the future of our wildlife resources, we need to continue to have hunters and anglers that are passionate about it and will go to bat for them. And to do that, going to have to make sure that we get folks outdoors.
Yeah.
You're talking about the R3 efforts are incredibly important, but we can't just rely on the states to do that. I mean, we as hunters and anglers have a responsibility. Introduce folks if they're interested in hunting and fishing. Take the time to take them, because we need those future champions.
It's been great to see. Well, here locally, it's somewhat new. I suspect down by you, this is old hat, but seeing these high school level fishing leagues get started and stood up and funded, creating opportunities in that 9th to 12th grade demographic, as we find a measure of success, especially here at CSF with our state legislative sportsmen's caucuses, and we are getting hunter ed and shooting sports introduced into the school through a curriculum. It's far easier, I think, with the angling part of it, for it to be accepted, for people to roll it in, and to that end, keeping it local, not really relying on the state system so much as far as the agency, being able to employ R3, but having it available as an extracurricular in the schools. I mean, that's enough to spark an interest in a lot of kids of all socioeconomic backgrounds. I mean, if you can get a bobber and a worm all the way up to a $100 swim bait, wherever you're at, fishing's pretty easy to get into. And if you just give folks an opportunity, you probably create an angler for a fairly long time, if not for life.
Yeah, absolutely. Fishing is probably the easiest way to get involved in the outdoors, because it can take minimal amount of tools to be able to go down to the local pond or creek or river and get somebody their first fish for sure. And yeah, I mean, the high school sports, high school bass fishing is just exploded. Certainly not just in the South, but I see it everywhere in the Northeast and the upper Midwest and the West. It's become very popular because it's one of those sports, kind of like the school shooting sports. that is also tremendously popular and a great way to get somebody involved. Either one of those, it doesn't take, you don't have to be a star football or
Right.
basketball or baseball player. You don't have to have a lot of real athletic skill to make a team. You just have to enjoy the outdoors, and that is easy to cultivate in someone, and they have a lot of mentors around them to really encourage them to continue participating. So yeah, it's grown tremendously, and it's a great thing with a number of companies. I know Bass Pro has certainly got behind all the youth outdoor activities, but certainly on the bass fishing world, they've done a great job supporting those efforts. So yeah, if you're a bass angler, I'm sure there's a local high school fishing team. Volunteer to help be a captain and mentor some folks.
No doubt. Well, it's a great way to end the conversation on a positive note for sure. And there is a lot to be grateful for and celebrate, keeping with the theme of this series here. So I want to thank you for your time, Chris. Thank you for the history lesson and your thoughts. And the show, the series continues. You mentioned Bass Pro. Probably got some folks from that organization you may know coming up in the next next episode. So stay tuned for that. Should be a good one. And again, continue to celebrate all we've done over the many decades and hundreds of years to get us where we're at in 2026. And yeah, we'll do it again. And hopefully you're getting out there now this time of year and enjoying the waterways as turkey seasons have closed. And some of us are looking forward to late August and September. But for now, we'll go chase wherever we can on the water. Chris, it was great to see you.
Great to see you, Fred. Take care.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.
This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies 18+.